All right, let's go 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool, and we've got a special guest join us in a little bit. They're not quite in the green room yet, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Getting the pre-applause button, prepared.
Don't jump too early. Yeah, so we're gonna be talking. We kind of hinted at last week, but we're gonna be talking with the author of the book Dark Persuasion.
Very dark.
Yeah, like
talking brainwashing.
Dark. Yeah, brainwashing.
The history of brainwashing.
Yeah, what's the subtitle? A History of Brainwashing from Pavlov to Social Media.
Yeah.
So we'll find out what Pavlov has to do with it and kind of how all this is carried forward. So it should be an interesting. This is our second, super college educated university professor type person in a month. So,
So I read this. I stumbled across our guest today is Joel Dimsdale, and I stumbled across his book probably a couple of months ago. And it's one of those that you find, how Amazon, how tricky they are. And when you read one book and they suggest, it's, and then something like this, I don't know if it was the cover, but just the cover and the title of the book got me a little intrigued. So
hey, you're definitely into these dark persuasion books. Like you're always the one bringing those to the table. So
I don't know if it's history. It's a combination of history. And then I'm always fascinated with cults. These people that get people to drink Kool-Aid or drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And, the Heaven's Gate, the Jim Jones, all of these are fascinating to me to see how common people like you and I just get totally duped, every day. So
yeah, it is fascinating to watch for sure. So yeah, we'll dive deep into it and talk about
part of it's just
governments and history and
religion,
all the things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. I think we might hit all of those today.
Yeah.
Religion, and even politics and government and brainwashing. It's all on the table today.
Even there's the oh shoot, I left my notes over there. Talking about the government, the CIA, I mean, even going back to war, POWs, the art of war, China, when they obviously, some of the psychology tactics that are used on prisoners to get them to cooperate. So it's fascinating. And
we'll be covering the gamut today for sure. And I see Dr. Joel just popped in the green room.
Excellent.
So do we want to do our beverages or just bring him on? Or?
Let's see first. Should we say, let's ask him from the, as he's in the green room, does our guest have a beverage? Let's bring him up. I don't understand I can't lip read.
You can't lip read.
Hi, Joel.
I have some coffee. It's a little early here.
Yeah.
We were talking about that earlier. You might be having some, a little caffeine since you're on the West Coast.
Yeah, but I have to tell you, hey, if you guys know any great gluten-free beers that are available out here, let me know. Because I have celiac disease and I can't drink beer anymore. And the stuff I can find is just pretty.
Yeah, we'll have to. It's interesting. This must be an academic thing or something, because our guest 2 weeks ago, Vanessa Bond, she's up in the Northeast, but she's, kind of in your world a little bit, and she was having a gluten-free beer. We'll have to go look at that footage and see what beer that was that she recommended. I don't know if you can get it nationwide or not, but she claims it's the best gluten-free beer out there. So,
well, that would be lovely to know.
Yeah. So
I'll tell you, I went through a phase, Joel, where I had to drink, not because I'm gluten-free, but because my wife went through this thing. And typically I was just trying to support her the whole time. And that was a difficult difficult time period, but I did find one that it's called Omission, that is gluten-free, and it's to me it's not bad at all. Omission.
Got it.
So yeah,
I'll look for it.
That's about 1 out of about 50 that I tried that were was actually really good.
Oh yeah, there's some Red Bridge or something like that.
Yeah,
it's by Miller, and it's wet. That's about all you can say for it. So.
Yeah, it's like sorghum. It's made with sorghum. So I wasn't a huge fan of that one. I don't know about you.
All right. Well, since we're here, I guess we should just jump in.
Yeah,
we do a quick bio, and then
well, we got to talk about what we're having. I mean, Joel's having coffee, but
I know. But...
Joel, we titled this our juvenile segment. We go really fast. Well, we try to go pretty quick, especially if our guest doesn't have a beverage. So Sean, what are you having?
I am having a ready to drink cocktail. Since my stouts are pretty much gone for the summer, this is a painkiller cocktail, which is basically like rum and pineapple and coconut. So it sounded very refreshing on this 100-degree day here in Austin, Texas. And so I'll be drinking this one straight from the can. It's 10% ABV, I think.
Oh wow,
pretty strong stuff. How about you?
And I am having on my end, I'm having a bourbon barrel tart cherry.
Wow.
This is a wheat. So it's one of the Kentucky. I don't know if you're familiar with these, Joel. The Lexington Brewing Company out of Kentucky. They have these bourbon series, these bourbon barrel series, and we've tried quite a few of them on the show. And this is one that I haven't had. So it's going to be. I'm sure it's as the name says, cherry. I'm not a big cherry fan, but it does sound a little refreshing during the summertime. So I don't know. We'll see.
And what's your go-to coffee, Joel?
Well, I have a Guatemala dark roast coffee. So
all right, I do like a dark roast. So
yes,
I'm up on that. I like that. All right, well let's cheers it up, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Not bad.
It's not bad at all.
Cool.
So, do you want to do our ratings later? Kind of save those, Sean?
Yeah, we'll savor them. See how they turn out. So,
all right. Well, Joel, thank you for joining us today. I talked to I think I reached out to you a few weeks ago, and Sean and I were talking before you joined us on the show. I actually stumbled across your book, and I always find these type of books very interesting. Sean and I get into topics regarding cults, and we've had experts on our program in the past with talking about I guess mind control and how that works within the realm of cults. And I don't know, Sean thinks I'm on some kind of a tangent here with the dark persuasion, but I really find it interesting because I'm kind of a history buff, and reading your book, you go back to the early days, I guess the back to the 20th century, where you've got, communism, and then you've got, how this propaganda was used in Russia, and then also all the way up to the CIA, where they learned some pretty interesting things along the way. So I'm curious, what got you to, before we begin, what got you to write a book like this? I'm sure that, is this your area pretty much of focus and expertise?
Well, I've long been interested in how people make bad decisions, not just bad decisions, but terrible decisions. And certainly I've seen a few instances in my clinical practice over the years. I'm a retired professor of psychiatry and seen many patients. But what has struck me as also a history buff is that there are numerous instances where people and countries seem to go massively astray. And one of the questions is, why is that? People might say, well, gosh, is it propaganda? Are people mentally disturbed? Are they brainwashed? And I realized that I had no idea what the origins of that crazy term brainwashing is. And so I got interested in that. And it's actually a very old phenomenon. It's a bad term. Scientists hate the term, and we prefer something like coercive persuasion, which is more precise.
Right. Not quite as catchy.
Yeah, it's boring. But when I tell people I'm interested in brainwashing, they say, "Well, Joel, isn't that musty old stuff and communism and Cold War and bad science?" And of course, some of it is, but it's far older than the 20th century, and it is continuing today in the 21st century. Of course, we used to say that the Cold War was over, but we're rethinking that, so it's quite contemporary. And there have been some crappy scientists studying it, and there are also some Nobel laureates. So I think it's important to keep track of it because it's present in so many societies.
Yeah, I think it's reading some of the stuff that you wrote, the brainwashing is kind of interesting, that term in and of itself. Where did that originate from? Because was that from I think I read is China? Is it Chinese or Korean?
Well, the Korean War, this is in the 50s. And of course, the Chinese were involved in the Korean War as well. So when you say Korea, China, Russia, United States, it was all one big unhappy family. The predecessor to what we now know of as the CIA was called the OSS, and an OSS propaganda operative coined the term, and it's a brilliant term. It just grabbed everybody's attention. And he was troubled by a lot of the behavior of Westerners who'd been imprisoned when the Chinese, when Mao took over China. They locked up a lot of Westerners, a lot of missionaries, and some of the missionaries started parroting back sympathy and enthusiasm for the Chinese Communist cause. And then when the Korean War hit, a number of Americans were POWs, and after really brutal treatment in the prison camps, many of them started, if I say collaborating in little letters, they would make propaganda broadcasts back to the United States. Wasn't exactly treason, but it was disloyal. And what really grabbed people's attention was that roughly 36 of them defected, moved to China and Russia, and this was a hell of a thing for the country. So the thought was that the communists had devised some new, powerful, arcane way of brainwashing people, just pouring the thoughts out, and scared people a lot.
Was there anything that these people had in common that made them easier to manipulate? And
Jonathan, that's a terrific question. That was one of the big deals. So who is vulnerable? Is everybody vulnerable or not? This was a huge topic. And even today, there's a tendency to assume that really bright people would be immune to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case. There's a little bit of evidence to suggest that people who've been less exposed to things in the world are a little more naive and are a little more able to be influenced. And there's some crazy data along this. The FBI has maintained a huge database, hostage and barricade situations. And the acronym is HABAS, hostage and barricade situations. And so they've looked at instances where people who've been kidnapped or held hostage start to develop sympathy for their captors and what makes people more vulnerable. Kids are a little more vulnerable, children. And as I said, people who have had a relatively isolated life experience. But other than that, black, white, highly educated, not educated, doesn't make any difference. And that was the case in Korea as well. We compiled massive dossiers of each of the people who defected, and people, the CIA and journalists chased down all these soldiers, ministers and grade school teachers and neighbors. It was really an awesome effort, particularly if you think back in the 1950s before internet. It's not easy to do that. And some of them were officers. Many of them were young, and one of the big conclusions to emerge from all of this is that we hadn't done a particularly good job of educating our soldiers what the heck they were doing over there, who the enemy was. And many of them were young, non-high school graduates. So they were a bit more persuadable because of their life experience. But the big ingredients in brainwashing are massive stress, sleep deprivation, isolation from friends and family, and being locked up in a prison of war camp is pretty stressful. The sleep is actually more interesting. I used to do sleep research as well, and we've known that if you sleep deprive somebody, they get a little confused. Maybe when you were younger, you pulled some all-nighters and didn't get any sleep. We used to think that this confusion was only in the context of total sleep deprivation. Now we've learned that partial sleep deprivation is also very effective. So if you're getting 4 hours of sleep and you normally get 7 or 8, it's like you've had 4 or 5 beers, and you're not as sharp. You are infinitely more impressionable and persuadable. And people, we've been looking at this in laboratory environments. And so many of the hostage situations involve deprivation. Maybe it may be not intentional, but certainly people were brutalized and lucky to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I think the third ingredient, so we're talking about brewing, the third ingredient of coercive persuasion is isolation. You want to get people away from their friends, their family, and you don't want any contradictory information. Look, I'm a dog enthusiast. If you have a dog and you're trying to train a dog, the last thing you want to do is to train the dog with a lot of hubbub going all around you. You want a quiet environment where the dog can focus and not be distracted. And if you are trying to brainwash somebody, you don't want that person getting contradictory messages. And you want to have your own messages be constantly hammered home. So sometimes you mentioned an interest in cults. All cults in some way sequester people. The issue is whether that's a physical barrier or just a social convention. Some cults actually have a physical barrier, a wire fence. I mean, you can't get out. Other cults say, well, you're going to go to hell. You're bad if you leave, but you can. And so there's a certain reluctance about leaving. But many of the cults, Jonestown, for instance, where people were isolated and sequestered and locked up in the jungle behind barbed wire fences. And there was no opportunity for them to get any other message, any other information.
Yeah, especially in a day, before Wi-Fi and internet and all that kind of stuff, it seems like it'd be easier then, but you still see a lot of influence today, even though we have access to all the information, all sides of the story, supposedly, right? And yet we still see people getting very into one way of thinking or another.
Sure. Sean, I think the interesting question is whether with today's access to information, is that giving us more strength and resistance, or is it making us more vulnerable? And again, if history teaches us anything, it is that younger people who are less sophisticated and less exposed to the world are more likely to believe what they're told, what they read, what they see on screen, whatever. The problem is that we all have favorites. We have favorite media. We have favorite sites we go to. The question is, do we at least click on a site that is different, that you would disagree with, just to kind of know what they're saying and muse about it? A lot of people don't. A lot of people have gotten to the point where they're so frustrated that they just delete and block anything that has a different viewpoint. I think the social media, look, we're having a great conversation. We're separated by thousands of miles. We're having a great conversation. We couldn't do this.
Right.
That's terrific. If we're doing this all day and all night, if we're not sleeping well, if I'm some adolescent kid who is surreptitiously on the phone checking social media all night long and being bullied, the stress of that, the sleep deprivation, the consistent isolation from other messages, that's pretty treacherous, and we don't have a clue how to deal with that. It's it's like a social contagion, and it takes.
Yeah, we're really only 10 years into it. Like, we just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to imagine that it's only been 10 years. With social media, but that's it's pretty new for the human brain and behaviors, and
Look, we've had automobiles for over a century, and we're still struggling about what do we do about substances, driving, and alcohol. And now, of course, it's interesting with marijuana because the whole issues of what does a cannabis level mean, THC levels mean. That's really a tough research area. Mm-hmm. But something new like social media, we don't know. I mean, what's right? What degree of regulation is right or not? We have no idea.
Yeah.
And, one of the problems is that it's the question of, is the truth sexy enough? We were joking earlier about the term coercive persuasion versus brainwashing. Look, brainwashing, if you do a search on the internet, 100 times more websites are available on brainwashing as they are on coercive persuasion. And that's because it's a really zesty topic. And
it's a very visual term. Like, it's two words that you can picture in your mind. You can't really picture coercive. Maybe word persuasion doesn't have a picture associated with it typically.
Yeah. And I think with messages on the internet, particularly with disinformation campaigns, there was a RAND study a while back talking about how to counter disinformation, and they had this really dark conclusion, and that is, don't expect a squirt gun of truth to outweigh a fire hose of deception, and that's where we are.
It's crazy because I feel like we're in a time where there's nothing. I think Sean and we've talked about this in the past, where it's like there's two sides, it seems like today, and both sides get their, as you mentioned earlier, they get their information or they get their media or their news from their own channels. And so I feel like there's no such thing as maybe it's been a long time since there was a balanced media out there that just gave us the news instead of giving us opinions, right? Or feeding us our opinions on either side. But you feel like that's what the news today or media today has devolved to, is it's no longer just, giving you what the news events of the day. It's actually telling you what to think, right? I mean, it's giving you opinion more than news.
I think we all long for the days of Walter Cronkite and news in that context. But again, I think for the term of brainwashing or coercive persuasion, it is important to try to distinguish between that and persuasion, other types of persuasion. Mm-hmm. Look, we can have a discussion.
Yeah.
We can try to persuade each other about all sorts of things. Some easy topics, some hard topics. Education, in a way, is a type of persuasion.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy is arguably a type of persuasion. The question is the coercion and the coercive intent. And that's where we have to be really alert to risks. The government was quite concerned about this. And, we've been trying to coerce each other as a species for hundreds of years. But what happened at the dawn of the 20th century is that we got science involved. Pavlov, this brilliant Russian physiologist. We think of Pavlov as just drooling dogs, but he was brilliant. That guy could train a dog to respond to C and ignore a C sharp. I mean, that's precise learning. Pavlov's dog lab was flooded, and the kind of 1917-ish, and the dogs were rescued at the last moment. And Pavlov was dumbfounded to see that the dogs forgot everything that he'd trained them, and that their personalities had changed. The dogs, maybe one dog used to like Sean, and another one used to like Jonathan, and another one hated me. It all got mixed up after this expression of trauma. And
wow, interesting.
So they forgot all they learned. They changed their personality. They changed their disposition. And Pavlov spent much of the rest of his life studying this in people. And the governments got very interested. Lenin came and made a site visit to Pavlov's dog lab, and he stayed for hours talking and asking Pavlov, could he help Lenin reform the Soviet people so that they all would become good communists? And Pavlov said, well, why, yes. Whereupon Lenin endowed Pavlov with this very large scientific research institute, and Stalin continued the support thereafter. So there was always interest in, can we bring some science into this art of coercion? And it moved into a lot of focus on truth serum. Can you force somebody to tell the truth by slipping them a drug? And everybody was interested in that in World War II. The Nazis were interested in that. The Allies were interested in that. So it's this kind of fascinating collaboration between military, government intelligence agencies, academia. Everybody was interested for their own reasons in this, and there's no problem with military research or intelligence studies or any of that. But the question is where it led them, and as they started tippy-toeing down a very difficult path, it led to some awful things. A lot of surreptitious drugging of people with psychedelics, and that.
What was the MK Ultra project that was?
Yeah, the MK Ultra was a way of funneling funds from the CIA to academia via a front operation. And some of the researchers who were supported arguably didn't know where the money was coming from. And many of them did. Would it have made a difference one way or the other? Well, not necessarily, but it was all hush-hush. And more to the point, there were awful studies that were performed. Again, I mentioned
what was the interest in psychedelics? I'm curious from their perspective on.
Well, look, today there is an emerging interest in psychedelics in therapy and in treatment. That's new. There was a little bit of interest of that in the 50s, but really the whole psychedelic approach was that if I could rattle you enough, would you spill the beans? So they tried this. They'd slip psychedelics in somebody's beer at a bar in San Francisco. They hired hookers to give psychedelics to the Johns that they were in business with, to see whether the Johns would start talking more. The CIA, kind of just crazy to think about. You'd come in to see your boss, and he'd put a little bit of psilocybin in your coffee, and then watch you to see how bizarre you would behave. And so all of this was routine, but there were some odd things that went on up in Canada. I'll go off on a tangent. I don't know. Are either of you interested in Jason Bourne movies or books?
Yeah.
I love those things. And you know, the premise is that Jason Bourne is this kind of unhappy, handsome, unhappy young guy who meets up with this avuncular CIA psychiatrist who says, "Oh, Jason, we'll work it out." And so they ablate Jason's memory and teach him how to be the consummate assassin. All of that happened under MK Ultra, except for the assassin bit. So there was a prominent psychologist and a prominent psychiatrist up in Montreal who were involved in studies of sensory deprivation and throwing every possible psychedelic drug at once on somebody, and then outfitting people with a helmet. Now, we were talking a few minutes ago about social media and how new all of that is in the last 10 years. Headphones were not particularly around in the 1950s, but they had helmets, like soldiers' helmets, and they wired the helmets with speakers and would repeat messages over and over 250,000 times, trying to persuade you to think differently. Meanwhile, they'd bombard you with psychedelic drugs and all sorts of interventions.
So, Joel,
what they found.
Go ahead. Sorry.
What they found was that they weren't particularly good at changing people's minds, but they were very good at doing a brain wipe. They could remove large chunks of memory with these sorts of odious interventions.
Wow.
So I'm curious, Joel, like you said, your book is called Dark Persuasion, and you go into some of the dark stuff. I'm curious, why do you think in your research that we tend to, when we start studying these things, we tend to kind of move towards that darker side and figure out, it feels like that's just the kind of pull. We want to find out how far we can push or break people as opposed to make them better, and how can we get the most out of this stuff? I mean, is it balanced, or is you just hear more about the dark side?
I hope you're wrong. I don't know. I think what happens is that you have a tool, and it starts to get used in a different way, and that's the history of medicine. Lots of medications are encountered just by serendipity, and we learn, oh my gosh, how interesting that this drug that we thought was going to be good for this, well, it's also good for that. And then somebody says, well, gosh, people were using barbiturates in the 30s and 40s to help people with major trauma. And people started talking about things that they were blocked and couldn't remember and couldn't talk about readily when they were on the drug. And so imagine, you're just minding your own business. You, as a psychiatrist, and you write this up in an article, doesn't probably the farthest thing from your mind that somebody in Langley, Virginia will say, hot damn, let's take that to Hungary and see whether we can force some people to talk. So I don't know, Sean, I don't know whether things drift to the dark side. That's a kind of a philosophical question beyond me. The powerful tools get used. So,
yeah, you mentioned earlier, it's not really in the persuasion realm, but you mentioned earlier about, some of the psychedelics being used in studies like MDMA now and in MAPS, which I think is pretty big out in California where you are. It's kind of rolling out nationwide, but that's a very positive to me use of it.
I think it is a very positive, and it's going to be very positive if we remember some of the lessons of what we did wrong in the 50s.
Yeah.
In the 50s, we weren't studying volunteers. We weren't studying people who had the capacity to say, gee, I'm suffering. I would like to try this. And I understand that the risks are A, B, C. That's not how we did things in the 1950s. So can we pay attention to the ethics of it and consent? And can we keep track to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks? Drugs, you can get sick on aspirin. The issue of who gets sick, who's vulnerable, how is it administered? So I think that as a field right now, we're taking that seriously.
Yeah. Because psychedelics are, they are persuasive, right? They change your brain chemistry in ways that we really don't understand. So yeah, you do have to be careful with it. And, of course, the same could be said for whether it's natural or man-made. Doesn't seem to matter. It's like, especially in the U.S. and the West, where we like to take things to the extreme. More is better.
Yeah, and natural or man-made. The only advantage of man-made is that you have a precise dose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether either of you cook or whether you like spicy foods, but when you go to the grocery store and you pick up a jalapeno pepper, you don't know what you're getting in for. Yeah. You don't know. It's not going to be as hot as a serrano pepper, but the fact of the matter is that there's some variation in natural herbs, and also, for instance, marijuana. In fact, there are many constituents that are psychically active in marijuana. Yeah, THC may be the bulk of it, but is the precise chemical THC that you get from pharmaceutical company, maybe that's so precise that you're not getting those other things that are coming in a natural. So I think we'll have to fight that out.
And it seems like every day there's a new molecule of THC being discovered. It's just it's insane how, because of the Farm Bill and a lot of stuff, how fast they're exploring that and trying to get different strains out and everything else that they can to sell more of the stuff. So, so Joel, in your book, you talked a list. We went over a couple of the items, like common features of. It's a little chart that says torture and coercive persuasion, terror, sleep deprivation, diaries and confessions, isolation from family and friends, patience of the interrogator, interrogator alternates kindness and brutality. So that's like good guy, bad guy, I guess. Secrecy and no legal defense. I'm curious. You were writing this during COVID, right? I think I saw 21 was the copyright date.
So actually, COVID really helped me write this. I got because nothing else.
A little extra time on your hands, right?
like every week, I was stuck at home. Thank God for Zoom and all these things, but the libraries were open. I had time to do things, and actually finished the book a year early. The publisher was stunned. But to be sure,
it's amazing when you're not going anywhere what you can get done.
Yeah, but to be sure, as I was working on things, I was wondering, does this tell me anything relevant to today? And I was very careful, I hope, and I think I was, not to go there. I think we see best with a certain distance and perspective, and
Sure.
I wanted to have a good perspective, and I also wanted people to take the idea seriously and grapple with it. I didn't care whether people were left, right, in the middle, any of that.
Yeah.
So I just didn't want to get trapped into talking about contemporary politics and what's right and wrong in COVID treatment, etc. But to be sure, you see very strong opinions.
Yeah, and that's what my question was going to be. And obviously, it's a free country; you can not answer if you don't want to. But like looking back now, kind of 3 years removed, do you see places where some of this coercive persuasion playbook was used by media or government or anybody during that?
So we certainly saw a lot of distorted messages being repeated, hammered in. And we certainly saw a lot of people ignoring anything that didn't fit their worldview, absolutely ignoring it. Threats, there were threats made. I'm not sure that the people threatened changed their mind about what was the right treatment. They maybe quit their jobs, decided they didn't want to be in the eye of the storm anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not so sure. I do think that in terms of the vaccine, we were foolish. We spent all of our time thinking about how to develop the best vaccine and didn't think very much about what would make it appealing to people to take a vaccine.
Yeah, it was definitely a poor marketing rollout, that's for sure.
And it's marketing, it's education, it's all of that. It's persuasion. And we thought, well, the truth will set you free. I've got this vaccine right here, and you'll be fine. And we all thought, a lot of people thought, well, gee, people will just go for that. And that wasn't the case at all. It's like asking the wrong question. There was a very interesting study back in World War II of bomber flights. Bombers were flying over in Europe, and they were getting all shot up to pieces. They'd land, and the Air Force asked a bunch of statisticians, well, here's a map of bombers and where they've been hit by bullets. Where should we shield the plane so it'll be safer? And problem is you can't shield the plane everywhere because it weighs too much. So they gave the statistician this map and some shows bullets in the wings and in the belly of the plane. And the statistician said, wait a minute, you're asking the wrong question. Don't you notice that none of the planes come back with bullets in the nose of the plane?
Yeah.
So I think we can frequently ask the wrong questions. And in public health, that's really important. They're tough.
Yeah. And I wonder too if some of this is like the pendulum swinging, like, where you have, like maybe, especially the older generations, like you've had a little more life experience and you've seen some people, like you've had some dishonest dealings throughout your life with the whole spectrum, whether it's government or business or whatever, right? And if you get more wary, so you push back harder when you get something this big, and you're being told what to do. Nobody likes being told what to do for the most part. So, we all kind of resist that, I think. So, yeah, I just wonder, in some ways that's healthy, like you said, like, because you mentioned, like, if you don't have a lot of life experience, that's the people who tend to be susceptible.
The younger.
The younger
generation.
Or just more shielded, or just, you don't get out much, whatever whatever defines naive. So, yeah, I just, in some ways, like, whether you agree or disagree, I think there's some healthiness in people pushing back on just about anything. I mean, I think protests in some ways are good, right? Because it shows people are willing to push back against things they don't agree with, as opposed to just falling in line. The problem is when it gets out of hand in either direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And in medicine, medicine is inherently conservative. Most docs think twice before they prescribe a newly approved drug, because it's more the rule than the exception, where we find that there are emerging data that shows some things that we hadn't seen before. So a little skepticism goes a long way and is helpful.
Yeah.
I think the question of the way of the world and what is proof? Science is self-correcting. We shoot down hypotheses that don't work, and we are quite willing to acknowledge that we go off in funny directions and it doesn't work, and then we turn around and try something else. It's kind of like if you look at swallows flying around, these huge clouds of swallows, and they're going every which way. The swallows are doing a good job. They're doing their job. Nobody would pick up this swallow and say, "Hey, Hank, you're stupid. You went that way, and now you're going this way." And so a lot of people blamed docs because we came up with some early suggestions and we reversed ourselves. And the point is, we don't know, and we're trying to get more data, and it keeps emerging. It's the opposite of coercive persuasion.
Yeah.
Because in coercive persuasion, you are sequestered and you're not exposed to all the things that go right and wrong. You're not seeing the different views. And I think we see the problems when people are just consorting only with a very narrow group of people. They don't know the nature.
On both sides. And I think that, a lot of statements during times like that where the science is settled and don't question the science, to me is like the opposite of science, right? I mean, to me, science is always about questioning, and, there's no, it's testing. It's, you're testing,
reevaluating, testing.
Absolutely. As you said earlier, you're always, you're testing, and if one thing doesn't prove out, then it's okay. it's on to the next. So,
but at the same time, people get upset. It's like, well, you just said this, and you change.
Right.
Like, we're in a weird time where you're not allowed to change your mind, but everybody wants you to change your mind.
Exactly.
It used to be,
or there's a fallibility or an infallibility that is placed on these things, these institutions, which shouldn't be. Absolutely. I mean, it's
interesting to look at weather maps, because it used to be that the weather would say very precisely, it's going to rain tomorrow. And of course, every time it doesn't rain, that's a false alarm, and you pretty soon start to disattend to the weatherman. But if you look at hurricane maps, another couple months, the hurricane season will be on us, and you notice how they have now conveyed the idea of uncertainty about where the breadth of the path of the hurricane. It shows that we're not so sure the further out that we go, and I think we get that now in a way that we didn't get that in the 19-
that was whoever came up with that kind of cone of uncertainty. Came on in the last 3 or 4 years, I think. Mm-hmm. That's a good piece of like expectation setting, marketing, kind of combination of both. That I agree. That was a really kind of helps set expectations. That look, we don't know exactly what's going on, but we think pretty good probabilities based on all these models. It's going to end up here. So I like that. Switching gears a little bit again, Joel, as we start to wrap up here, you've done a lot of research on this across a century, right? I'm curious, like, what was 2 questions. Number 1, what was most surprising in your research? And then 2, what are you most concerned about moving forward?
What surprised me is that how vulnerable we all are. I think most of us regard ourselves as, if not strong bodies, certainly strong minds. That nobody can pull the wool over my eyes, etc., etc. As I went through all the sorts of things that have occurred all over the world, it's quite clear that under the wrong circumstances, people can be coerced into believing, saying things that are terribly against their best interest. I think what worries me, your second question, is that we now have very powerful tools. I like the Mark Twain quote.
It's the first thing that came to my mind when you said that.
We now have very powerful tools. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, as a species, we've been trying to coerce each other for centuries, but we've gotten better at it. We have a scientific method in psychology. We have psychiatry and neuroscience in terms of pharmacology and sleep. And there are lots of directions that suggest that people can be coerced. And we'll have to be on the lookout for that in the coming years.
Yeah, the statement that we're all vulnerable, I think, is so true because, Sean, we were talking. Remember that documentary on the latest cult? What is it? The Nexus, I believe. There was a documentary on that, and what's so striking is like the people that got sucked into that are not people that. It's like you said earlier, Joel. These are a lot of the people that were pulled into this cult are educated people. They're professionals from all walks of life. And it's surprising to see just who gets wrapped up in that.
I mean, you could look at in the business world, Enron or Bernie Madoff. The amount of people that got, taken in that was just unbelievable.
Sure.
And the level of people who should just know better about, and I think when you say like we're all vulnerable, I think the people who are most vulnerable are the ones that think they aren't.
Yeah.
Like if you're not willing to admit that you are susceptible to X, then X is probably going to take you down at some point.
Right.
That's the one you won't see coming. It's like it's like the pastor who doesn't think he'll ever have an affair. That's the thing that'll get you. Right. It's just like, there's a blind spot there. Like, so.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, do you have any more questions or?
No, thank you, Joel, for the time today. We want to mention your book again, Dark Persuasion, A History of Brainwashing from Pavlov to Social Media. Great read. You can check it out on Amazon, or you can get it over at joeldimsdale.com and check out his website. Joel, we appreciate you joining us on the show and spending some time with us. Great topic.
And for you history buffs, there's another book. You want to mention that real quick? Where'd it go?
Anatomy of Malice.
Anatomy of Malice. That's your newest book? Is that right, Joel?
Actually, Anatomy of Malice was the first one in the websites. It's out in a lot of foreign translations. You don't have to read it in Chinese or Korean.
Okay, I was going to say, wow.
Read it in English. It's there. And that's about other people who made bad decisions, and Nazi cabinet ministers. So I've been struggling with these issues about how people make terrible decisions for many years, and it's a sorrowfully very rich and extensive set of history and documents. So,
yeah, and I could get into a conversation at some point on some of these other, your more psychiatric books. I'm kind of in that world right now with coaching, and I love how psychiatry and coaching is starting to like cross paths a little bit and borrow each other's tools, and so I'm finding some cool stuff with kind of in that world. With people like that. So I think I saw somewhere you've published like 500 different things. I'm sure it's not all books, articles and things like that, but 500 publications, that's a lot.
Yeah. I've been busy. So.
Yeah. Love the grandfather clock too, by the way.
Yeah. I should have turned it off. I'm sorry.
No, it's kind of cool. It's like,
I love it.
You don't hear those very often anymore.
No.
It's kind of neat.
Okay, guys, be well.
All right. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. All right, Sean. Fantastic. That was great.
Yeah.
Good guess.
Yeah.
Did you get all the questions you wanted there?
I did.
Good stuff. Interesting. We talk about like all of these things. It makes me think, you and I are both, we're military, I guess, vets, and, you can laugh at the stuff for people that fall prey to it, but we were subject to a lot of the stuff,
Sure.
in boot camp.
Absolutely. I mean, that is what boot camp is. Like it's a structured brainwashing. Yeah. It really is. Like, I mean, you can't get more isolated, more like, I don't know how it is now. I don't know if they have access, but I mean, obviously when we went in the 90s, like there weren't cell phones, there wasn't internet. I'm sure there's not now
isolation.
Yeah, I'm sure there's not now either. I'm sure they take all that stuff, but
I would think so.
And also, I mean, even like, if you get down to uniforms and everybody's shaving their head so they all look alike or more alike.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, because I remember going to basic training, and you got like 3 days where you're kind of, before you actually get in your platoon, you're getting your uniforms, you're getting the haircut. And I remember the day of haircuts.
Yeah.
Like everybody still had their hair. Even I had hair back then. And
that was like, that was part of your identity.
It was like all the identity and your street clothes, right? So you had some identity, but man, that day that you got your uniform package and you got the haircut, all your identity was stripped.
That's right.
And it was surreal. Like it was just like
you were one around, of many.
You don't recognize the guys that you just spent 3 days with. It was wild.
That's right. That's
and then you start getting yelled at, and then you start getting the doctrine starts coming at you. And
absolutely.
Because when we were in, let's say I was in 92 to 95. So in basic training.
Same for me. 92. Yeah. So 92 to 95 for me.
Yeah. You've got the the songs while you're marching and jogging that are all forms of indoctrination, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
About
Dress
being
right, dress.
alone.
Everything is
Well, even some of the
everything's the same.
cadences. Some of the cadences, like, you know, your mama was home when you left, your daddy was home when you left, your girl was home when you left, and then like all that's gone. That was the point of that. It's like all that's gone, buddy. You're here with us now.
Yeah.
So
all identity is completely, as you mentioned, you know, that's their first goal, is to strip that away, because if they take your identity away,
then they can reshape it.
That's right. It's that you have to start there. It's
kind of like I mean, we were talking about psychedelics, but it's kind of like an ego death of sorts. You know, it's like you strip yourself down to the bone so you can rebuild back up in a new image.
Yeah.
I was always resisted though throughout. I mean, I was not a good soldier. So,
I wasn't either.
That's why I was only in 3 years, because I was like, this ain't for me.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Uniforms,
yeah. There were some lifers that we both served with, but that wasn't either of us. We were looking for the exit.
Yeah. I'm glad I went, but man, I was looking for the exit like day 3. I was like, okay, this ain't for me. So yeah, it's wild, but
good stuff. Well, let's do a quick wrap on our beverages. So I got to say, mine, I kind of like mine. It's got. I was a little hesitant on the.
You said it's a wheat beer, right? So it's kind of like a Sam Adams, but with cherry.
Yeah, tart
in
cherry.
A bourbon barrel.
Yeah, but it's a nice I thought it would be like too sour, but I was pleasantly surprised. So I'm going to give mine. I'll give it a 4.6. 4.6.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, mine was definitely, a cocktail. It didn't have any really beer flavor. It's funny. It says craft cocktail, but if you go on their site, they call it a malt beverage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all right. I'd probably give it like a 3.5. Wasn't great, but it was definitely easy drinking. Definitely tasted like a cocktail. So not too seltzery or anything like that. It was just.
What's it called again? Hold it up.
It's called the Painkiller Cocktail.
Painkiller. I love that.
It's an actual cocktail. Like, because that's the first I looked it up. I was like, what is a painkiller cocktail? And that's just a standard. You could go to any bar and order that. And it's basically rum, pineapple, coconut, pretty, typical beach drink.
Oh, sure.
So that's what you get, I guess, the morning after you had too many the night before. It's the painkiller cocktail, I guess. I don't know. So
good stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but I'd give it a 3.5.
3.5. All right.
Plus, hey, your tart cherry, tart cherry is one of the best supplements for like recovery from like muscle or endurance work or injuries. Like tart cherry is one of the best supplements for that. So, so that's your recovery beer right there.
There you go. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Have another.
8%. I think I will.
So. All right. Well, next week we've got a cool guest.
What's on this? Yeah. What are we having next week? Because
did you get your box yet?
I got it today.
Did you? So, okay. Very cool.
It came in today. Yeah.
Have you opened it?
I did. I had enough time to open it and look in, and saw the coffee cup, cool little coffee mug, and the book and everything. So
I saw an ad on Facebook for a book. At first, I thought it was just a book for ideas that influence. I was like, well, that's right up our alley. So I I immediately commented on the ad, said, hey, we'd love to have you on the podcast. They replied back.
Right.
And then he said, hey, let me ship you a box. I was like, there's 2 of us. He's like, that's fine. So he shipped us out a box, and it's a whole experience.
Yeah, it's creative packaging.
Book. Yeah, it's a whole kind of shock and awe box that we've talked about before, with all these mystery envelopes and scratch offs and a coffee cup and a coin, and it's really well done. So I'm excited to kind of talk about,
I just want to know who does his, product, who he used for his product packaging and all.
That's a lot of work. I mean, that's
great. I mean,
to orchestrate all that
detail of the box, because the box, it's all around ideas.
Yeah.
And even the box, inside the box, you lift up the lid, it's got the little light bulb in there.
Yeah, and it
That's
had
so
like
cool.
Post-it notes. It's got a dry erase marker, and there's instructions on how to use all these things that are in the box.
Yeah.
So it's a very interactive experience.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of started going through it this morning, and then I'm going to go through it over the week so that we're ready by next week when we talk to him. But
yeah,
very impressive. And we've talked a lot on this show about how we think the way to stand out moving forward is to be more experiential.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is a good example of that. So I'm excited to have Daniel on the show from Ideas That Influence, and yeah, should be good.
I'm looking forward to that one. That'll be a fun discussion. Nice transition from going down the rabbit hole.
We're kind of bouncing back and forth. We had the had the PhD, and then we had Tom with the funny videos, then we got to have another doctor talking about dark persuasion, and now we'll go back to
fun,
a little more fun. So yeah, we're having a nice little good cop, bad cop month.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
On the show.
It's good. Nice to have a little variety, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for listening or tuning in. And you can find us, as always, persuasionbythepint.com. You can find us on Spotify or iTunes, wherever your favorite podcasts are found. Leave us 5 stars. Thanks for checking us out. And we'll see you all next week.
See ya.